So our next panel is on addressing global challenges. Our moderator, Eithne Treanor, who's joining us from Dubai, is the founder and managing director of Treanor Media. She's going to introduce the panelists, who will share their personal insights into global challenges that matter most to them. Eithne, I hand over the discussion to you, along with Martin Thomsen and Spencer Abbot, both alumni of IE, Gayle Allard, IE faculty, and Sean McManus, an IE friend. So please, if you could take the stage, please let's give them a warm round of applause. Let's get the energy level back. Okay.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very, very warm welcome to you. We have on this panel the challenge of talking about global challenges. So the mandate, you can just imagine, is absolutely huge. Now, please join us in the rooms. We've got first-class seats down here in the front. No extra charge. Really, we really want you in place. Please, 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 make yourself comfortable. We have 40 minutes of an absolutely riveting discussion that I know you're all going to really enjoy. What we're going to do here is hopefully engage all of you. I have a few things we do. We engage, inform, educate, and inspire. That's what I want our panelists to do. So a tall order. Now, depending who you talk to when you look at the global challenges, and you just heard there from Peter Sutherland and Guillermo in that discussion there, really also one of the global challenges, talking about the tremendous moral challenge of our time, of the migration that is going on in the world today, and the fact that we all have a responsibility to respond to it. We'll hopefully get round to that. But when we look at what the global challenges are, I mean, it depends on who you talk to. The World Economic Forum is looking at a variety, the IMF is looking at a variety, and again, I think everybody agrees that economic growth is certainly one of the key challenges we need to look at. Climate change is another, without a doubt. We look at the oil market at the moment, and we look at the consequence of lack of investment in it. And we look at the trillions of dollars that's been taken off the industry and consequently knocking on to the banks and to everybody else. There's a lot of big challenges there. What is the global economy going to do in the terms of China? Will it get better? Will it get worse? Does it matter? All of these issues we really, really have to address. And we have to look at food security, energy security. We have a tremendous list of them. And as well as that, we have to keep in mind the Donald as well. That this weekend has been said is a bit of a global challenge. We heard that from the G7 players. So let me call our panel to the stage here. We're very, very happy to have them with us. A gentleman who began his career as a management consultant and quickly moved to the energy sector here in Spain and now in Turkey. He's a specialist in strategy planning and portfolio management, retail and wholesale, commercial operations, and he worked Spain, Portugal, and he's now very, very busy in Turkey as the head of country manager for BP Fuels. Please a warm welcome to Martin Thomsen. Martin, please join us. We're also thrilled to have with us a gentleman who began his career as a mixture of academia and journalism, and more recently focused his talents in developing live content for major conferences around the world. He now advises companies in the area of communication strategy, interactive content development, partnership, and international policy. Formerly with The Economist, the director of programs, he is now the co-founder at M&D, an independent company. Sean McManus joins us. Thank you so much, Sean. We're thrilled to have with us a faculty member here at IE, a lady who's been in Europe for the last 25 years. Her research has centered on labor markets and in particularly youth and immigration in the European labor markets. She's also been keeping a close eye on what's going on in Africa. We want to welcome now a very warm welcome for the Professor of Managerial Economics at the IE Business School. Gayle Allard joins us. Gayle, thank you so much. And a gentleman who began his career at the U.S. Naval Academy and is a pilot in the U.S. Navy. He's worked extensively in Japan recently, and before that he flew combat missions at the outsets of the conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq. We're very happy that he is here with us at the moment. He is now currently serving at the U.S. State Department, working on issues related to Latin America and the East Asia-Pac region. So a very, very warm welcome for White House Fellow at the U.S. Department of State, Spencer Abbot joins us. Thank you so much. Now, one thing I do just want to add, we have a very dynamic panel here from very, very important companies and organizations around the world, but today they're here in a personal capacity. So the reflection of their views is not their company views. I just want to make that clear to all of you. And we're very thrilled they're going to be able to share those views with us. Gayle, I'd like to start with you. I think all of the key players out there, when they look at global challenges, the one they agree on is the state of the the global economic situation here in terms of what is going on here, how we can maintain a stronger global economy. Can we maintain a stronger global economy? So if you can address that one as one of the key challenges. Thank you.
So welcome to all of you. Very nice to see you here today. I see some students in the crowd, and I'm sure there are some in the other rooms. I used to say in class sometimes that when this crisis was over and the dust settled, we were going to look out the window and say, where did our world go, right? Well, it's happened. We're there. The dust is settling. And we are seeing a world that's settling down to a permanently, I believe, lower growth rate. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and it's taking us a little time to accept it, but probably the biggest reason is demography, and Peter and Guillermo both talked about that this morning. Population growth is a big part of economic growth, and when that stops, or even goes into reverse, as it will soon, the economy is not going to grow as fast. But there are other things. For example, trade appears to have hit a peak, and it's going down. We used to get a lot of our growth from trade. Technology is doing odd things, and I think we're going to address that a little bit later, but it's helping and hurting growth. And then inequality, which is a big issue that I think we're going to be addressing later. More unequal societies, more unequal economies grow less. And so the fact that we've allowed this inequality to fester is slowing down our growth. And then we don't have any policy tools left. Our debt is as high as it's ever been, higher than it's ever been. Monetary policy has been pushed to the limits. So it's hard to push growth, and all we have to do is look at Japan to see how that drama plays itself out. And then China is sort of the bellwether of all of this. You know, the great economic miracle of China, and we're seeing them slow down so sharply. So for me, the fact that growth is going to be permanently lower than it was in the 20th century, which was a century of unprecedented growth as far as we know, the fact that we're going to be living in a world of lower growth, I think really calls into question the whole theme of today's sessions, which is success. You know, we define growth as success. You know, how do you tell your boss you're successful if you're selling less, producing less, right? Or if nothing has changed? It's very easy to define our growth and congratulate ourselves on our growth with, on our success with growth. But we're going to have to, in this changing world, we're going to have to find different metrics. And a lot of companies are grappling with this. You know, what if we don't grow? Then how will we show that we're doing well? I think this is one of our big challenges going forward.
So nothing like a dose of optimism and realism to get us started there. I'm not sure where the optimism is, but we'll find a bit by the end of this conversation. But again, we realistically have to look at, we're in a very, very different world. I want to come to you on this one, Martin. And when we're looking at growth in the world, and particularly in the last year or two, we really have looked at the growth in the oil market as well, and in the energy sector. And we've seen that when that has come off in the last year, gosh, did that put the brakes on the rest of growth around the world. But there's even a bigger picture in terms of we can't live without energy. It's not negotiable in that sense. But we also have to look at the sustainability of energy for the future. Again, how important do you think that is as a challenge?
Well, when I talk about, I hear about economy and growth, despite the growth rate that we can expect for the future, something needs to boost that growth, right? And it's actually energy. And that energy comes in different forms, in light, in warm, in cold, in so different forms. And for the next 20 years, we see that energy demand will grow by 35%. Which is pretty an important figure for that. And the challenge is not about really if there is enough resources in order to actually meet that demand. It's actually the sustainability that you were talking about, which is, and my point of view about this is, the way I'm holding this is sustainability is about three factors. They can be in parallel, they can be sequential, it's really up to you. The first one is about access, how you access energy. right? Energy is not in Geneva, it's not in Luxembourg, right? Energy, and as we grow in energy demand, energy sits in remote areas. The second point is about energy affordability. It's really affordable to everybody, but it's not affordable for a country. It's really affordable for the different industries. It's really affordable for the households. It's really affordable for all the range of the society. And the third point about sustainability, I would like to put here on the floor, it's about environmental sustainability. It's all about carbon footprint. It's all about energy intensity. And as we also, and that's for me the biggest challenge, to be honest. How you optimize those 3 points. And in top, I think there's a bigger challenge right now that we are facing, which is a $50 oil. If we can start to see what $50 oil are starting to impact not only energy companies, energy fully resourced countries, but all other industries and economy, that's another challenge that, as I call it, challenge plus, that I would like to talk about it in the next meeting, in the next minutes. Thanks.
And in fact, I'm off to the OPEC meeting next week, so they're thrilled already at $50 a barrel. You can just imagine it. So again, it has its implications, but what I'm hearing a lot too is that, again, it comes back to an affordable price of energy and one that doesn't take investment off the market, doesn't kill unemployment, all of that too. It's not just about a price for the producer and the consumer. Now, we're looking at the growth, Spencer, and I want to talk to you on this level here. We're looking at growth that we need in the world, whether it's got to come from somewhere. And of course, what has been the great savior in recent years has been China, without a doubt. But China also, and you look beyond China, you look at the entire Pacific Rim, but also look at the relations between China and America. I mean, how important that is. None of these countries can grow in isolation, and we've all got to support each other. And that has got to be one of the absolute vital relationship that actually has to be maintained and indeed encouraged in the years to come. How are things looking there, and what can we expect?
Well, thanks so much, and I'm so pleased to be here. I first want to thank the organizers for this great conference, and the chance to come back. It's my first time back in Madrid since we graduated, and I'm so pleased to see a lot of my classmates for our 10th reunion later today from the Executive MBA program. And that for me was really a pivotal career experience that opened many opportunities going forward. And speaking of pivots, there's been much discussion made of the U.S. pivot to Asia, now often termed a rebalance to Asia is the term that's being used. But I think that why are we talking about this today? You outlined some good reasons. But I think when you think of the Asia-Pacific region, it's important to think broadly and of Asia-Pacific nations on the Pacific Rim. By far the most prevalent language spoken in terms of number of nations is Spanish, with 12 of those, and I include the United States, which is the number 2 Spanish-speaking country in the world by number of speakers. So this is an important issue, an area in which Spain has a lot of economic and cultural linkages. And so when you talk about the Asia-Pacific region, and specifically the U.S. relationship with China, I absolutely agree that one of the big challenges, we're talking about challenges today of the coming century, is maintaining stability in that relationship. It's a relationship that is the largest trading relationship. Just last year, China surpassed Canada as the U.S.'s top trading partner, in part because of, as Martin was mentioning, the oil price effects from the United States' largest producer and source of petroleum by a large margin. And it's a fitting day today to talk about Asia-Pacific issues, as President Obama is in Hiroshima today, the first visit by a sitting president to that city. I had the chance to join Secretary Kerry last month for a G7 ministerial, which was the first visit by a U.S. cabinet official to visit that city. And in terms of challenges, this follows on the president's marker laid down in a speech in Prague in 2009 toward the goal of no nuclear weapons. And it's obviously a goal would be challenging to achieve, but will take the concerted effort of many nations working together. And when we look at the progress that's been made since World War II, Gayle talked a little bit about some of the challenge of sustaining that global growth, but avoiding great power conflict in the years since then has been a great achievement, of course, of NATO, the most important security alliance, one could argue, in history, in avoiding that Cold War conflict that was so damaging amongst great powers on the European continent in the 20th century, avoiding that going forward. There are a lot of areas in which we can cooperate with our partners in the Asia Pacific, and especially with Japan and other key allies where my family and I spent 4.5 years. Some of those areas are disaster relief, common challenges that we face, and then devising solutions that bring together the private sector, that pull in the innovation and resources and human capital that's in the private sector, that's in various partner governments to achieve collaborative solutions. So I look forward to talking a little bit more about that going forward.
Indeed, an awful lot. And again, that essential trade relationship that has to stay in place. I mean, it can't run in isolation. Sean, when we look at all of the growth that's needed, when we look at the harmony that's needed in many ways in the world to actually try and progress, there is a sense that we need a united and a very acceptable corporate governance in a way, but also government governance. It's not all about corporate governance, but governance has to be in place. When you look around the world, I mean, where are you seeing the good countries, the bad countries, the ugly countries, perhaps? But we don't think, I don't think we have that right yet, do we?
Well, you're using a very nice word for it. We've been talking a lot about this notion of corruption and what a systemic and intractable issue it is around the world. It's a huge issue in Asia, it's a huge problem in Africa, it's a huge problem in Europe, and it's a huge problem in the United States. And sometimes it's the issue of individuals, wealthy billionaires, corrupt people in the first two, hiding money in the second two. And the issue's been in the news quite a lot lately. I mean, I'll give you 3 examples. The Economist magazine, which is where I used to work, published just a couple of weeks ago something they called the Crony Capitalism Index. So this is a look at 23 countries and how they rank in terms of corruption, and we can talk a little bit more today about the details of how they came up with that data and what that means.
How they came up with the name is even more fun.
And the name as well.
The Crony Capitalist Index. Yeah, we like this one. Okay, but tell us more.
And so the second, of course, is around the same time David Cameron hosted a corruption summit in London. So this was very recent. He invited 40 representatives from 40 countries to come. And again, we can talk about some of the accomplishments that were made, but it obviously was an issue that came to the forefront. Prime Minister Cameron called corruption basically the cancer that's eating away at the heart of so many of the world's problems. And actually, there were some interesting accomplishments there. There were some points taken that we can talk about more today. Subsequently, China, which is hosting the G20 this year, just announced literally today in the news that they will put corruption at the forefront of the conversations with the G20 at that meeting. So we do have finally a recognition that this problem needs to be tackled. And I think we all know why we're sort of grappling with this issue so much at the moment. I mean, Eithne brought up the World Economic Forum and dealing with global challenges. This year in Davos, the big theme was the fourth industrial revolution, right? So following the foundation of currency, following the foundation of the printing press, following the first industrial revolution at the beginning of the 20th century, we're now going through seismic transformations in the global economy. Mechanization, technology is changing and replacing industries that have existed for a long time. So when you have people getting rich very quickly, regulators have trouble keeping up with that, and you have huge problems that ensue. So again, there's good news and bad news around that. Technology can lead to greater transparency, but can also lead to the kind of changes that accelerate corruption. And so later in this discussion, I think we can talk about some of the changes that are happening that are hopefully leading to some solutions.
Gayle, when we look at the economic growth that is in place in the world, even if it's stagnating, even if it is lower, it's not divided equally. And there's still a big north-south divide, and even within the south-south at the moment. I mean, what can happen and what should we be doing in terms of actually, bringing this closer together? Because there's been such good work done, I think, in so many years, and now we almost look like we're going into a period of isolationists in terms of trade policy as well.
Yeah, there is a globalization backlash, and it's not the first one we've seen. If you look at history, you probably remember that the early 20th century, the end of the 19th, the early 20th, was a period of accelerated globalization. And then there was a backlash against it, and we saw the crash, we saw nationalism, we saw war, and in some ways, some people are drawing this parallel that we have lived another golden age of globalization after World War II, when when the Second War was over, we sat down and we said, trade helps us, trade is good for us. Let's make sure we're going to have more trade permanently going forward so we can grow, so our incomes can rise. And we have done that. And people have benefited in terms of their incomes going up, or maybe their real incomes going up because goods become cheaper. The rich have become richer. But some people have been left behind. And I think, and we'll be talking about this later too, but I think a lot of the backlash we're seeing in different countries, my country being, of course, the most scandalous and exciting one with Donald Trump, but in many other countries we're seeing the same thing, the anti-immigrant feelings, the nationalism, the Brexit, wanting to build walls, not wanting the refugees to come, all of it is pushing back this globalization, saying, wait a minute, it's taking my jobs, my income is stagnant, these people are coming in, I don't know them, they don't share my values, whatever they are. And so I think we're living through a period when if we're going to keep a globalized world, we're going to have to make an effort to communicate its advantages, and we're also going to have to make an effort to support the people who are losing out in this process.
But again, it comes down to tremendous uncertainty, I think, Martin, when we're looking at this. And we all know the phrase, the VUCA world. What is it? Uncertain, volatile, complex, ambiguous. Well, without a doubt, so what? We've sort of always been there. But again, it almost appears now that we've learned nothing from the past. We're now in there's more head-scratching going on around the world than there is anything else. Nobody seems to know where to go.
Absolutely.
When we look at that volatility and uncertainty, it's scary.
Yeah, and from the energy part of things, low oil, right? I just give you three numbers. Imagine the world produce 100 million barrels per day. We've been suffering $50 per barrel of dollars per barrel in the last 18 months. So that's $5 billion of less value generated in the industry. If you multiply that by 365, which is per year, we're talking about $1.8 trillion that are not generated there. And that brings another layer of volatility into, one, the energy sector. And now what I feel really as intellectual, a really world case is how oil are actually feeding volatility into other sectors, which is the countries. So really resourcing rich countries, they are having lower growth rates. They're not having money. They're getting into devaluation. Some of them close to bankruptcy. And actually, volatility that has been in the retail sector, in the financial sector, now it's coming into the energy sector, and the energy sector is actually exporting volatility back into the world, which makes the sustainability much more difficult.
And then I think on top of that, then we look at the developed world, we look at the emerging markets. When we look around the world, and I want to sort of quickly look at the US, depending again who you talk to, we're seeing some good growth figures from the US occasionally, and then you talk to other people and say that the country's going to be in a recession by the end of the year. Spencer, looking not just at the US and what's going on there, but even in a wider context in terms of what's going on with relations with Latin America. At the moment, we're looking again at a huge pullback in Venezuela, partly driven by the fact that oil prices were so low, but again, bad governance. It's got a list of things that went wrong, I think, in Venezuela. But when we look at that very big trading bloc, and a very important trading bloc, what can we do there in terms of, and I don't expect you to give us the prescription to solve the region's problems. But again, we're in a very difficult position there too as well, aren't we?
It's a very interesting issue area, and I think it's important to look back at some events of recent months, some important developments there. You saw the president making the first trip of a U.S. president in March to Havana that's taken place in many decades, and that followed on Secretary Kerry's visit to Havana last August to open up a new U.S. embassy there. And so that process of normalization that has impacts within Latin America in other ways in terms of U.S. relationships, and removes and lessens an issue that had been an obstacle of sorts in some relationships. You have some important developments going on in Colombia where there's a peace negotiation underway, and that has gone through many stages of the negotiations, and it looks possible, like as if there may be a peace accord in the offing, in which case President Obama announced in February a Peace Colombia plan, and that follows on the Plan Colombia, through which the U.S. Invested over $10 billion in foreign assistance over nearly 15 years, and then
and of course, that's vital for economic growth. We sometimes forget about, the peace deal that has to happen in Colombia and various other places like that. But tell us, in terms of economic growth, that has to happen.
And I think this work, as foreign assistance and avoiding conflict is so important in exactly that economic growth. And I think it's important to look back. We're talking about challenges today, and Gayle laid out some of the challenges to sustainable growth. But I think it's important not to forget, looking back at the past few decades, what tremendous moves forward that we've made globally against poverty. In 1993, there were about 2 billion people worldwide living in extreme poverty by the UN's definition. By 2012, that was 1 billion people, despite substantial population growth occurring to that time, around 700 million now. And that has very significant effects worldwide. And again, avoiding conflict, those efforts, that's the #1 brake on development. So we need to continue those efforts to work toward collaborative solutions. And there's just one case in point, the longest running conflict in the Western Hemisphere that could potentially come to a negotiated settlement later this year.
Again, that's what we need to see. We look at some conflict areas too, geopolitically, particularly too in Africa. But that is a region, it's a continent that has to be brought, into the developing world. I mean, it really has to be. And whether it's brought kicking or screaming, or whether it's coming of its own accord. I mean, what can we do to actually incorporate Africa? There's been some great strides made. You've done a bit of work there. We look at different countries within Africa, some of them doing better than others. But again, we can't leave them out at this point in terms of growth. I'm sorry, Gayle, come in on this one. And Sean on this very much.
Definitely, Africa was it was the fastest growing region of the world up until oil prices collapsed. And now it's slowed down a bit. So, commodities can be a blessing and a curse. Yeah. The countries that were really dependent on commodities are going to have more trouble going forward. But at the same time, maybe they can escape some of the things that go along with the resource curse, like corruption, no accountability for their governments, and the boom-bust cycles and all of that. So, I think it's the commodity price decline is a mixed package for Africa, but the countries that are particularly interesting are the ones where, the growth is not coming from commodities. Places like Ethiopia or Kenya, or countries that don't have big natural resources to export, but they're getting into agribusiness, agriculture, manufacturing, services. The service sector in Nigeria, just immense and full of dynamism. And so I think the big thing that's driving Africa, of course, is their demography. It's the only region of the world that's going to keep growing. And like they told us this morning, it's exploding. So, there's this young labor force. It's going to be bigger than China's very soon. And their population, Guillermo told us this morning, by 2100 is going to quadruple. Amazing. So either that's going to cause some serious social problems if they can't spend the money, provide the infrastructure, provide education, and open the way for jobs for all these young people, or there will have to be an outlet for migration. The cities are going to be a problem. But Africa is just on the cusp of what we call a demographic dividend. It's a tremendous opportunity, and they could really jump into development in the next few years if they had this piece that Sean works on.
Yeah, Sean, I mean, what's your outlook for Africa when you look around and some of the work you're doing there?
Well, I was so thrilled to see the journalism awards that preceded this, because we have a little bit of a different perspective, or at least an example, I think, of a situation where you can sort of come at a huge intractable problem in a kind of a different way, maybe with smaller steps that hopefully will lead down the road to something big. And that's some work we're doing with Bloomberg, which has started something called Bloomberg Media Initiative Africa. And the idea is, what is the role of journalism, financial journalism in particular, because that's Bloomberg's specialty, but what is the role of a free press and journalism in making strides against corruption and promoting transparency and economic growth. So there's been quite a bit of money invested in the last couple of years into training journalists, helping journalists understand how to analyze and read data from demographic data from the IMF or from the UN, whether it be private company data from companies doing work in Africa around the world, and being able to tell stories from that data that will hopefully lead to greater investment and greater opportunity, as well as expose some of the things that are holding Africa back. So when we first got involved in this program, it was it was all very optimistic. 5 of the 7 countries in the world, the fastest growing countries in the world, were in Africa. The economic context, of course, has changed dramatically just in the last couple of years, as Gayle mentioned, with commodity prices changing. But we have seen anecdotal evidence of new, well-trained media organizations, and that partly that's journalism, but partly that's understanding how to create sustainable business models around media, and the progress that's been making in kind of working towards greater opportunity for everyone on the continent.
But again, that also comes with freedom of speech and good governance coming from government, and actually allowing these journalists to report, which sometimes in some countries, not just in Africa, doesn't simply happen.
Africa has a huge problem with what they call brown envelope journalism, which means someone from a company putting a stack of cash in a brown envelope and handing it to a journalist to report on something. And in Kenya recently, there's been actual situations where journalists have been killed for reporting on the wrong thing. So there's huge problems that need to happen. But what you do see certain times is that when there is incremental progress around reporting on companies and on governments in many countries, that does create opportunity, and so it's a step in the right direction.
I want to bring it back to energy slightly, and when we look at also the advancement that has to be made in Africa, it's probably not the first place that we think that might go into high-tech renewable. And in many ways, they might have more abundant gas, definitely a cleaner fuel, but they need to be allowed to grow, and the West in one way cannot dictate to them that they have to be part of the solution, even though we all want them to be. How, with COP21 and that sustainability in place, how can we actually encourage, the developing countries to get involved in more sustainability? And also, can we actually achieve these goals that COP21 has laid out? Tremendous support, but in 2018, when they review them, people will get a slap on the wrist if they don't get there. But, do you think the momentum is there and the commitment is there to actually make a difference this time?
I think that the momentum is there. The objective has been cleared out, which is the first step in order to go there. I think that we need to start to identify real actions in order to implement. We talk about greenhouse emissions. We talk about carbon footprint. Did we put a price on carbon emissions?
Do you think that's the solution?
Well, I think that we need to start to tangibilize things, right? We need to start to put what I call the bell on the guy and start to chase on it. So, do we have a carbon price? Some countries are actually more progress than others. Do we have a world carbon price? I think we don't have it yet. And actually, what I call, we need to start to value energy prosperity, energy sustainability in monetary terms, because I think that we are very, very smart and very quick in order to understand ERR, NPVs, returns of investment, etc. But do we actually value energy prosperity or sustainability going forward? And I think that's a currency that we need to start to think on in order to get real serious about sustainability.
Now, when we're looking also at sustainability, I want to look at the growth of cities. This is where everybody is moving, and in many countries around the world, we're seeing mega cities. Spencer, when you look at the growth of mega cities, it comes with advantages, it comes with disadvantages, and who's to say what in different countries, because it varies too. When we look at that shift in demographics, it's a permanent shift. And also the connectivity of people within cities and the perhaps the scares that brings with it too. It's not going to be an easy way forward, and it's very new. We've never seen this before.
Yeah, it's a great question. Having just come from 4.5 years, our family was in Tokyo for 4.5 years until last summer, the world's largest megacity when you combine Tokyo and the surrounding contiguous urban areas. But there are megacities in the developing world, and there are going to be more because that's where the big population growth is happening. And this trend of movement from rural areas to urban areas has been an ongoing process that really transforms economies. It transforms many approaches that need to be taken to social problems. In 1950, about 30% of the world's population lived in cities. Just recently, that went over 50%. And we're going to go above 60% by about 2030, above about 66% by projections by the middle of this century. And that creates opportunities. Right now, that just over 50% of the population that live in cities is responsible for around 80% of global GDP. So it's a productive part of our global society. However, it does present challenges as well. That close proximity that we have creates challenges in terms of controlling potential pandemics. We saw the concerns and the fears that were out there during the recent Ebola crisis as we look at confronting the challenge of the Zika virus, understanding it, devising societal solutions toward that in conjunction with partners who are most significantly affected. These are complex challenges that require complex solutions and against this big backdrop of global change that you outline, Eithne.
Sean, how would you say connectivity is, playing a huge role? I mean, and it's absolutely changed. The World Economic Forum was talking about this being the fourth industrial revolution. And again, it touches everything we do. I am keeping in mind that we've only got a few minutes left. So if we can just touch on that and how it has actually changed our world. And Gayle, I'll come to you in a minute.
Well, sure. I mean, when you think about solving the transparency problem, I mean, what better way than to allow global access to the internet? Now, there's a huge race going on throughout the world about who's going to be able to do that. You've got an announcement literally yesterday that Facebook and Microsoft is partnering with Telefonica to create fiber optic cable from Virginia in the United States across the Atlantic to Bilbao. And that's going to allow for European hubs to enhance their bandwidth at an exponential rate. You've got Google battling Facebook, battling Microsoft, battling other tech companies about who's going to solve the connectivity problem in Africa and India. Facebook had some big stumbles in India because it went into India with this notion of free basics, which was access to 5 websites, including Facebook, and basically Prime Minister Modi ended up saying this is not really what we want. We want to have net neutrality. So there's a race underway. There's a battle underway about who's going to bring the internet to the next 5 billion people in the world. And we'll see how that plays out. I think the good news is that once that happens, we're going to see accelerating opportunities to expose corruption and to promote transparency and economic growth.
And Gayle, we have to embrace that technology, and we have to embrace that shift. When we look at, global growth, how can it actually help everybody?
With technology has always been a driver of growth. The problem is that it's also a destroyer of jobs. And so you usually, kind of juggling the two to see which one's going to outweigh the other.
But surely it's going to create more jobs, maybe better jobs. Well, one would
maybe
hope.
Better jobs, but maybe worse jobs, because in this industrial revolution, what are being replaced are better paid jobs. It's moving up the skill ladder. And so, we don't know what's coming. Surely there will be more jobs. We just don't know if they'll be better paid, which aggravates this problem of inequality that's festering in all of our societies.
And again, all of those jobs that need to be created, we look at unemployment in the world at the moment. I mean, it's probably at an all-time high. So I think the huge worries that are there around it, and indeed, we look at our, oil industry at the moment, the energy industry, that's actually added to unemployment in the next year.
Absolutely. So we with a $50 barrel, the industry actually is reducing a workforce by 25%. Right. So, and we are not able, the industry is not able to develop new technology, to develop new campaigns of exploration, of production, which actually feed more activity, which should actually feed more workplaces on that. So it's a success by itself.
Now, I'm afraid we haven't been able to give you too much optimism. We're very sorry for that now today. But we have to wrap up, and we have to leave you here. Right. Spencer, leave us with just maybe in the short term, if you could implement something today, or you can advise somebody, to do something that might just move us along in a positive direction, what would it be?
Well, I would say that against these challenges that we've outlined, I think we've done that, at least that part of things well. Whether it's avoiding great power conflict, nuclear nonproliferation, or nuclear arms control, counterterrorism, cybersecurity, confronting social issues like combating poverty, global health, whether it's pandemics or water quality and the associated issues with infant mortality. These are big, important issues that we need to confront together in a collaborative way. And that means public, governments, private sector, joining together in a dialogue to confront these problems. And by doing that, I think we can generate an approach that the question is no longer will we fail or succeed, but how will we succeed? And my understanding is that that's exactly what Madrid has done for tomorrow's Champions League final. It's not a question of failure or success, it's what type of success. So let's do that all together on these other issues and we'll do great.
Gayle, when we think of it, low growth is better than no growth. So how do we actually maintain momentum?
Well, I think it tells us something about our values being a little bit wrinkled up and skewed, that we are so terrified of a low-growth world. I mean, we didn't say today there's going to be a pandemic and, we're all going to die next year. And we'll all be here. We'll be here for a while, probably, and it's just going to be slower growth. And I think what it pushes us to do is really think what our values are and what's important. And personally, on a corporate level, on a national level, what kind of metrics are we going to use to measure success? And I think, for us, success is each person acting ethically to do something to address the social challenges. And if nobody ever finds out what you did, it doesn't matter. You did something. So I think that's something that we all need to take seriously. All of these problems require collective efforts, and if our governments don't do it, then on an individual level, every person should be pushing forward in any way they can, and if it doesn't lead to a promotion in your company, it doesn't matter.
And don't give up, exactly. It's about really moving things forward. Sean?
I think, to anchor this conversation in the context of a business school alumni event, we do a lot of research into what's on the minds of CEOs in the coming year. And you've seen a lot of the research coming out of the big four consulting firms, right? PwC, Deloitte do a lot of research into what are CEOs thinking about, what's keeping them up at night. This year, we really crossed a threshold whereby CEOs were saying more than ever, we have to articulate our mission, and we have to articulate what global challenges we're solving. We have to explain to our stakeholders where we fit in global society. And so CEOs now are really struggling with not only, in sort of getting together, envisioning and figuring out what is that message, but and then how do we explain it to our customers, because new generations want to know what challenge are you solving, where do you fit in, why do you exist, what's the point of all this? So I think, for companies to start thinking more about where they fit in the world and what challenges they're solving is a huge step as well.
Martin, I'm giving you the last word.
30 seconds.
30 seconds, it's all yours.
Give it back. Guys, give it back. I'm sitting here because I want to give it back, okay? The success, you can define success in a very short, my account, the car, the things, the house, the neighborhood I live. And as you evolve, I have 3 kids, I sit in Turkey. I see the humanitarian issue every day, believe me. My kids see it, I see it. Give it back, okay? You're going to be CEOs out there, right? You're going to be big guys out there in the private sector or in the government sector. Give it back, okay? Just put a little bit of your brain into the world, into the moral issues, into the food issue, in all that we are actually talking about. And if we give a little bit, each of us, into that, my kids, your kids, probably will have a better world in the future.
And thank you on that note. And even I think it plays into what we heard from our earlier speaker, about being involved. You don't have to be running for political office, but you actually need to have your say, get out there and actually do something, because I think we have a lot of challenges that everybody has to look at, and it is really our collective duty to make this work. I'm sorry we can't discuss more challenges up here on the stage, but it's been absolutely a thrill to have everybody here. So a big round of applause, please, for Spencer, Gayle, Sean, and Thomas. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.